The Dolphins just made a massive move that could completely change everything for the Dallas Cowboys. And I need you to hear this because what just happened opens up a door that Cowboys Nation has been begging for all offseason long. Before we dive into all of it, make sure you hit that subscribe button because here at Cowboys Live News, we are locked in on every single update the second it drops, and you do not want to miss what comes next. All right. So here's the situation, and honestly, when I saw this news break earlier today, I had to sit back for a second because the implications here are huge. Miami has officially parted ways with Bradley Chubb. Yes, that Bradley Chubb, the two-time Pro Bowler, the edge rusher that Dallas has reportedly been linked to in trade discussions for weeks now. He is no longer a Dolphin. He is about to hit the open market as a free agent, and if you are a Cowboys fan, you need to be paying very close attention to what happens next. But here is where it gets even more interesting. Chubb was not the only player Miami let go. The Dolphins went on an absolute roster purge today, cutting 4 players, including Chubb, along with offensive guard James Daniels, who barely even played before getting hurt, and then the big one, Tyreek Hill. Yeah, Cheetah himself, gone. They also released receiver Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Now, none of these moves were exactly shocking if you have been following Miami's situation. This team is in full rebuild mode. They needed to clear cap space desperately, and these 4 moves alone reportedly saved them somewhere in the ballpark of $50 million. That is not a small number. That is franchise-altering cap relief. So from Miami's perspective, this was always coming. But from Dallas's perspective, this is where things get fascinating. Let me break down what this actually means for the Cowboys, starting with the one name that matters most to us right now, and that is Bradley Chubb. Look, the Cowboys have a massive problem at edge rusher, and if you have watched this channel for any amount of time, you already know that. Right now, Dallas has 3 defensive ends under contract. Donovan Ezekanma, who can absolutely be a contributor. James Houston, and Isaiah Land. That is it. That is the depth chart, and I am sorry, but that is nowhere near enough to compete at a high level in the NFC. You cannot go into next season with that group and expect to generate any kind of consistent pass rush. It is just not realistic. So the Cowboys do not have the luxury of being picky here. They have to explore every single option, and Chubb just became one of the most intriguing options available. Now, here is where I have to be completely honest with you because I am not going to sit here and pretend like Chubb is some perfect solution. He is not. There are legitimate concerns. He is 29 years old, which means he is on the wrong side of 30 for a position that requires elite explosiveness. He is coming off an injury that limited him in 2024, and if we are being real, his production took a step back this past season compared to what he did when he was healthy in 2023. His pressure rate dipped down to around 12% this year, which is okay, but it is not great. When you compare that to his 2023 numbers, where he was closer to 15%, you can see the regression. And when you look at his career, there is a clear pattern. In years where he is not fully healthy, the numbers drop significantly. That is a red flag you cannot ignore. But here is the thing, and this is what nobody is really talking about. The Cowboys are not in a position to demand perfection. They need bodies. They need pass rushers. They need somebody who can actually get to the quarterback because right now they have almost nothing. So when I look at Bradley Chubb, I see a player who, yes, has some question marks, but who also has proven he can be a legitimate difference maker when healthy. And at this point in free agency, with the edge rusher market being what it is, can Dallas really afford to just pass on a 2-time Pro Bowler because of injury concerns? I do not think so. My take is this: if the Cowboys sign Chubb, I am not going to complain. He is an upgrade over the empty roster spot that currently exists. He brings experience. He brings pass rush ability. He brings a veteran presence to a defensive line that desperately needs it. Now, am I going to lose sleep if they do not sign him? Probably not, because ultimately it comes down to cost. If Chubb is looking for some massive payday, then yeah, I get why Dallas might hesitate. But if he is willing to take a reasonable deal to prove he can still be that guy, then this is absolutely a move worth exploring. And the timing could actually work in Dallas's favor here. One thing worth mentioning is that there is some speculation about whether Chubb's release might be processed as a post-June 1st cut, which would mean he technically would not be a free agent until the new league year begins. That is just a small detail to keep in mind, but it could affect the timeline of when teams can actually sign him. Either way, he is going to be available, and the Cowboys need to at least make a phone call. Would you do it? Would you sign Bradley Chubb to help fix this pass rush? Let me know in the comments, because I genuinely want to hear what Cowboys Nation thinks about this one. Now, let us talk about the other big name that got cut today, and that is Tyreek Hill. And I am just going to be straight up with you on this one. I do not want him in Dallas. I know that might be an unpopular opinion with some people, but hear me out. First of all, Hill had a $51 million cap hit this upcoming season. That is insane money, and he is coming off a serious knee injury that reportedly puts his availability for week 1 in serious doubt. Some reports are even suggesting he might not be ready until later in the season. So right off the bat, you are talking about a player who is expensive injured and 31 years old. That is not exactly an ideal combination, but here is the bigger issue for me. Dallas just went out and made a huge move to bring in George Pickens, and I am very excited about that addition, but Pickens comes with his own personality. He is a confident guy. He plays with an edge, and I think pairing him with CeeDee Lamb gives Dallas an absolutely electric receiving duo. Now imagine throwing Tyreek Hill into that mix. A guy who has had his share of off-field issues and whose career has started trending into that Antonio Brown territory where you just never know what you are going to get from week to week. Is that really the kind of energy you want in your locker room? I do not think so. Plus, and this is the practical side of it, the Cowboys need to spend money on defense. That is where the holes are. That is where the roster needs the most help. Going out and spending big money on another receiver when you already have Lamb and Pickens just does not make sense to me. So yeah, Tyreek Hill is available, but I am passing. Let somebody else deal with that situation. Kansas City will probably bring him back on a cheaper deal anyway, and honestly, that is probably the best outcome for everyone involved. Now here is where things get really interesting, and honestly, this one blew my mind when I saw it. PFF recently put out a list of the most improved players at each position over the second half of the season. And guess who they picked for defensive end? Sam Williams. Yeah. Sam Williams, the same Sam Williams who was basically unplayable for the first half of the year. According to PFF, Williams had a grade below 40 in weeks 1 through 9, which ranked him 117th out of 118 edge defenders. That is dead last, basically. But then from week 10 onward, they claim his grade jumped all the way up to over 80, which would have ranked him 11th among all edge rushers. And look, I will admit that Williams did play better in the second half of the season. Hard not to when you were that bad in the first half, but saying he was one of the most improved defensive ends in football, that he was actually good, I have some serious problems with that assessment. Let me explain why. When you actually look at the numbers, and I mean really look at them, the story does not add up. Williams played fewer snaps in the second half of the year. He had 21 tackles total for the season. His TFL numbers went from 3 to 4. He had 0 sacks. And his pressure rate actually dipped below 9%. We just talked about how 12% is merely okay for a pass rusher. Below 10% is bad. There is no way around that. So how does a guy with a sub 9% pressure rate and 0 sacks grade out as an elite edge defender? Here is what really bothers me about the PFF grading here. They gave Williams an overall grade of over 80 for the second half of the season. But when you look at his individual game grades, only one game was actually above that number. He had a monster game against the Eagles where he graded out at over 94. Great game. Credit where credit is due, but his next highest grade was in the mid-70s. And most of his other games were right around that range or lower. So how does one elite game plus a bunch of average games equal an overall grade of 80 plus? That math does not work. And I know PFF has their own methodology, and their grades are weighted differently based on various factors, but come on. At some point, the eye test has to matter. At some point, the actual production has to matter. And the production just was not there for Sam Williams. He made some splash plays, sure. He had a forced fumble. He contributed on special teams. But when you are talking about a starting edge rusher on a team that is trying to compete for championships, you need more than occasional splash plays. You need consistent pressure. You need sacks. You need to be a guy that offensive coordinators have to game plan around. And Sam Williams is not that guy, at least not yet. And here is the thing that really gets me. Williams has been in Dallas for 4 years now. 4 years. And in that time, we have seen flashes, but we have never seen consistent production. He has dealt with injuries, including the ACL tear, he has been one of the most penalized players on the team, which is a whole other issue, and he just has not developed into the player that Dallas hoped he would become when they drafted him. So the question becomes, what do you do with him? Do you bring him back and hope that year 5 is finally the year he puts it all together? Do you give him another chance based on that second half improvement, even if the numbers do not fully support it, or do you move on and look for other options? For me, the answer is clear. I am ready to move on from the Sam Williams era. I do not see enough there to justify continued investment. And with the Cowboys already needing to add multiple edge rushers this offseason, I would rather use that roster spot and that money on someone who has actually proven they can produce at a high level. If Williams wants to go play for Dan Quinn in Washington or whoever else wants to take a chance on him, then best of luck. I genuinely hope he figures it out and becomes the player he has the potential to be. But I do not think Dallas is the place for that to happen anymore. The organization needs to stop going with guys just because they have been around for a while. Familiarity does not equal production. And right now, production is what the Cowboys need more than anything else on that defensive line. So to bring it all back together, here is where we stand. The Dolphins just dumped a bunch of salary, including Bradley Chubb, who is absolutely someone the Cowboys should look into signing. Tyreek Hill is also available, but I do not think that makes sense for Dallas, given the cost, the injury, and the locker room dynamics. And Sam Williams got some love from PFF, but when you actually dig into the numbers, it does not hold up, and I think it is time for the Cowboys to explore other options at edge rusher. This offseason is going to be huge for Dallas. The moves they make in free agency and the draft are going to determine whether this team can actually compete next year or whether they are going to be stuck in mediocrity again. An edge rusher has to be the priority. It has to be. Because you can have the best offense in the world, but if you cannot get to the quarterback, you are not winning anything in January. Alright, Cowboys Nation, that is going to do it for today, but before you go, I need to hear from you. Would you sign Bradley Chubb? Do you agree with me on Tyreek Hill? And what would you do with Sam Williams? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one and I want to know what the fans are thinking. And if you are not subscribed yet, come on, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, join the family, and I will see you in the next one.